This place isn't for you. Get out now. We'd never hire someone like you, so don't even dream about it. Black women like you don't deserve those privileges.
Lila Monroe stepped into the interview room with the poise of a seasoned general, her navy suit crisp, her portfolio flawless, her mind sharp. At 45, she carried the weight of a 20-year career in strategic marketing, her name etched on campaigns that had reshaped global brands. She was overprepared, unshakably qualified, and ready to reclaim her place in the corporate arena. But the panel across from her two executives with clipped smiles and skeptical eyes looked at her as if she'd wandered into the wrong building. What they didn't know was that her husband, Ethan Caldwell, had just acquired their company, and from a hidden observation suite, he was watching every move they made. Lila knew how to command a room. She'd faced boardrooms of stone-faced CEOs, negotiated million-dollar deals in Singapore, and outmaneuvered competitors in Frankfurt. Self-doubt was a stranger to her most days. But this morning, as she parked her silver Lexus in the underground garage of a gleaming high-rise in downtown Austin, her hands lingered on the steering wheel, trembling for a fleeting moment. A memory clawed its way to the surface 6 years ago. At a Fortune 500 firm, she'd been summoned to a sterile office where a smug HR director told her she didn't fit the culture despite leading a record-breaking campaign. The sting of that dismissal lingered a quiet scar beneath her polished exterior. She closed her eyes, exhaled, and whispered to herself, "Not today." Grabbing her leather briefcase, she smoothed her blazer and stepped into the elevator, her heels clicking like a metronome of resolve. The lobby of Sterling & Pierce was a study in cold, elegant white marble walls, stark lighting, and abstract art that screamed expense but whispered nothing. Behind the reception desk sat a young woman with a slick bun and a gaze that scanned Lila from head to toe as if measuring her worth. "Good morning," Lila said, her smile warm but measured. "I'm here for the 10 a.m. interview with Meredith Holt." The receptionist blinked, caught off guard by Lila's warmth. She typed something, her eyes flicking to the screen. "You're Lila Monroe." A pause, then a barely audible scoff. She picked up the phone, her voice dropping to a whisper as her gaze lingered on Lila. After a hushed exchange, she hung up and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Someone will be out shortly." Lila nodded, thanked her, and settled onto a sleek bench by the glass wall. Her watch read 9:50. She was early as always. The lobby was eerily still, no hum of staff, no buzz of candidates, just the faint hum of air conditioning. 5 minutes ticked by, then 10. At 10:12, a man in a charcoal suit emerged from a frosted glass hallway. He didn't look at her immediately, and when he did, his expression flickered with something like surprise, as if she wasn't what he'd pictured. "Lila Monroe," he asked, his tone clipped. "Yes," she said, standing her posture impeccable. "I'm Nathan Reed, VP of Marketing. I'll be joining Meredith today." No handshake, no pleasantries, just a curt nod as he turned and led her down the hall, his polished shoes squeaking on the tile. Lila followed, her mind racing. This wasn't just a job interview. It was her chance to rebuild after 2 years away, caring for her dying mother. She'd stepped back from her career, without hesitation, managing hospital visits and late-night vigils with the same precision she'd once brought to corporate strategy. Now, she was ready to return, not as a shadow of her former self, but as a force. In the meeting room, Meredith Holt sat behind a glass table, her laptop open, glasses perched on her nose. She didn't stand or smile. "Let's begin," she said, her voice as sharp as the room's edges. The questions came fast, but they weren't the ones Lila had prepared for. "Are you sure you applied for the right role?" Meredith asked, her eyebrow arched. "This position requires cutting-edge tech expertise. How familiar are you with our platforms?" Nathan leaned forward. "And this 2-year gap in your resume? What exactly were you doing?" Lila's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "I was caring for my mother during her illness. It's in my cover letter. As for tech, I've led digital campaigns across 3 continents, integrating platforms like the ones you use here." She listed specifics, her tone confident, but Meredith's expression didn't soften. 2 years is a long time, Meredith said, her voice dripping with skepticism. Tech moves fast. Most candidates we see are younger, hungrier. Can you keep up with a 24/7 culture? Lila's hands clenched under the table, her nails digging into her palms. The memory of that HR director's smirk flashed again, but she forced it down. I've delivered results under tighter deadlines than most of your team will ever see. She said, her eyes locked on Meredith's. My work in Singapore doubled market share for a client in 6 months. I don't just keep up, I set the pace. Meredith's lips pursed. Singapore? That's ambitious. Nathan smirked, scribbling something in his notebook. Then abruptly, he closed it. Actually, there's been a mix-up, he said, his tone dismissive. This role was filled internally last night. Sorry for the inconvenience. Lila's breath caught, but before she could respond, Meredith added, We'll keep your resume on file. They stood there, movements brisk, signaling the end. No handshake, no apology, just a gesture toward the door. Lila walked back to the lobby, her heels echoing in the silence. The receptionist was on her phone, avoiding eye contact. The elevator doors slid open, and Lila stepped inside alone. The weight of the dismissal pressed against her chest. Not anger, but something heavier, humiliation laced with betrayal. She'd faced rejection before, but never like this. Never so blatant, so personal. As the elevator descended, she stared at her reflection in the polished steel. Her lipstick still perfect, her posture unbroken. But inside, a voice whispered, What if they're right? What if I've lost my edge? Unbeknownst to Meredith and Nathan, someone else had witnessed every word. On the 15th floor, behind a wall of tinted glass, Ethan Caldwell stood motionless, his hands clasped behind his back, his jaw tight. He hadn't moved since the receptionist's hushed phone call. From the observation suite, he'd seen the receptionist sneer. Nathan's smirk, Meredith's arched brow. Every word of the interview had filtered through the live audio feed, each one a nail in the coffin of Sterling and Pierce's leadership. 4 days earlier, Ethan had finalized his acquisition of the company Silent Surgical, and still under wraps. At 49, he was a titan in tech, consulting a man who'd built empires from mid-size firms, his name synonymous with precision and power. Born in Houston, educated at Stanford, he thrived on turning chaos into opportunity. When he saw Sterling and Pierce's financials and its glaring lack of diversity in leadership, he didn't hesitate. But this wasn't just a deal. It was a reckoning. He wanted to see the company's true colors, unfiltered, no scripts. He hadn't told anyone, who Lila was not even his closest advisors. She'd offered to skip the interview, sensing the risk, but Ethan had insisted. Go. He'd set his eyes steady. Let's see who they really are. Now, he had his answer. Replay, the last minute he told his analyst Sarah Klein, a sharp-eyed woman who'd been with him for years. She tapped a few keys, and Meredith's voice filled the room again. We'll keep your resume on file. Ethan's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened. He pressed a button on the console. Get HR to my office at noon, he said, his voice flat. The assistant on the other end hesitated. Which manager? Sir. All of them. Ethan turned to the window, Austin sprawling below its skyline, glinting in the late morning sun. A storm was brewing, not in the sky, but in the boardroom. Down the hall, 2 senior executives, oblivious to the shift, chatted about quarterly projections. They had no idea a seismic restructuring was already in motion. Ethan had spent his first 72 hours dissecting the company emails, hiring records, internal chats. The pattern was stark. For 7 years, mid- and senior-level hires followed a predictable mold. Same elite schools, same affluent neighborhoods, same predictable networks. He'd seen it before, starting out in tech, when gatekeepers dismissed him as too rough for their polished circles. They called it culture fit. He called it cowardice. And now, watching Lila, his partner, his equal face the same dismissal, he felt not just anger, but clarity. This wasn't about one interview. It was about a system that rewarded conformity over competence. Sarah, he said, turning. Do we have the front desk footage? Yes, sir. I want it all audio-video time-stamped. And I want it in my office in 15 minutes. Sarah nodded, already typing. Ethan glanced at his phone and texted Lila, stay close. This isn't over. She didn't reply immediately. He didn't expect her to. She needed time, and he respected that. But as he stepped into the elevator, one thing was certain. Sterling and Pierce was about to learn what happened when they underestimated the wrong woman. Lila sat in her car, the engine off, the silence deafening. Sunlight sliced through the garage's concrete slats, casting jagged lines across the dashboard. Her hands rested in her lap, her throat tight, her composure fraying at the edges. She wasn't crying. She hadn't cried in years, but the weight of the morning pressed against her chest, threatening to crack her resolve. She glanced at the rearview mirror. Her reflection, a paradox-polished professional, yet somehow invisible. 20 years of accolades, 2 Fortune 500 stints, and yet she'd been reduced to a question mark in 15 minutes. Are you sure you applied for the right role? Meredith's voice echoed each word a jab. Lila exhaled, her breath shaky. She'd faced worse, hadn't she? So why did this feel like a betrayal? Her phone buzzed Ethan's text. Stay close. This isn't over. She stared at it, her fingers hovering over the screen. Part of her wanted to call him, to vent, to laugh it off with a bitter, you were right. But another part, quieter but fiercer, stopped her. She reached for her briefcase and pulled out a notebook. On the inside cover, in her own handwriting, were 3 words, you are enough. She traced them with her finger, her resolve hardening. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. What Lila didn't know was that she'd been part of a larger plan. Days earlier over dinner, Ethan had confided in her about the acquisition. I need to know what I'm walking into, he'd said, his voice low. The numbers are solid, but the culture, that's where companies rot. Lila had nodded, understanding his need for truth. When he asked her to interview, she'd hesitated, sensing the risk. What if they see me as just another candidate, she'd asked. Ethan's reply was simple. Then they'll show us who they are, and you'll show them who you are. She'd agreed, not as a pawn, but as a partner, knowing the interview would be a test not of her, but of Sterling and Pierce. What she hadn't expected was the venom, the way Meredith and Nathan had dismantled her with smirks and half-truths. Now, sitting in her car, she felt a flicker of anger, not just at them, but at Ethan for putting her in the crosshairs. Back in the office, Nathan Reed was halfway through a protein bar when his phone pinged with an internal alert, mandatory HR meeting, 12:00, 15th floor boardroom. No exceptions. He frowned, checking the sender executive suite. Meredith, he called across the hall. You see this? Meredith, adjusting her earrings in a window's reflection, didn't turn. Yeah, just got it. Probably merger paperwork. They're always overreacting. She smoothed her blouse, unbothered. HR meetings were routine compliance updates. Diversity quotas, nothing urgent. But on the 15th floor, a very different scene was unfolding. Ethan stood in the boardroom, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. To his left was Sarah, her laptop open, footage queued. Across from them sat 2 HR directors, Carla Nguyen and David Wells, both visibly tense. Do they know why they're here? Ethan asked, his voice low. They think it's about the merger, Sarah replied. Good. At 11:58, Nathan and Meredith arrived, still chuckling about a client's typo. Their laughter died when they saw the room. No projector, no agenda, just Ethan, his presence like a gathering storm. A third figure stood in the corner, Victor Langston, the company's chief operating officer, a man with a reputation for ruthlessness and a personal grudge against Ethan from a failed deal years ago. Victor's presence wasn't planned, but his smirk suggested he'd inserted himself deliberately. What's this about? Meredith asked, her voice tight. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He nodded to Sarah, who opened her laptop. These are transcripts from this morning's 10 a.m. interview with Lila Monroe, she began. We also have audio and video recorded under our new equity protocol. Nathan's face paled. Wait, what? Meredith's eyes narrowed. That interview was canceled. The role was filled. It wasn't, Ethan said, his voice cutting through the room. You had a candidate who exceeded every requirement, 20 years of experience, global campaigns, measurable results. Yet you asked if she applied for the right role, questioned her ability to keep up, and dismissed her in 15 minutes. Victor leaned forward, his voice smooth but venomous. Let's not overreact, Ethan. Not every candidate fits. You know how this works? Culture matters. Ethan's gaze locked onto Victor's. Culture. You mean the one that's kept your leadership team looking like a country club for a decade? He turned to Nathan and Meredith. You told her the role was filled? Care to explain? Nathan stammered. We had a late internal candidate. It was a last-minute decision. Without my approval, Ethan's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a guillotine. Play the audio. Sarah pressed a key, and Meredith's voice filled the room. 2 years is a long time. Most candidates we see are younger, hungrier. Nathan's followed. Can you keep up with a 24/7 culture? The room fell silent, the words hanging like smoke. Meredith's face flushed, but Victor chuckled, unbothered. This is a misunderstanding, Victor said. We're running a business, not a charity. If she didn't impress, that's on her. Ethan's eyes darkened. She didn't impress you because you didn't look. And that's on you. He stepped forward. A full audit of your hiring practices starts today. Every candidate you've rejected, every hire you've made. And when the press release drops next week, none of you will be in it. Meredith's head snapped up. You can't. I can, Ethan said. And I will. The door opened, and Lila stepped in her presence like a blade slicing through the tension. Ethan hadn't planned for her to return so soon, but her text, I'm coming back. Let's finish this, had been clear. She wore the same navy suit, but her eyes burned with something new. Not anger, but certainty. Lila, Ethan, said his voice, softening for the first time. She nodded, then turned to the room. I wasn't here to beg for a job, she said, her voice steady cutting. I came to see what kind of company you run, and you showed me loud and clear. She looked at Meredith. You questioned my ability to keep up as if 20 years of results vanish because I took 2 years to care for my mother. You didn't read my resume. You didn't need to. You'd already decided I didn't belong. Victor snorted. This is dramatic. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. Lila's gaze shifted to him, unflinching. No, Victor. You're making excuses for a system that rewards mediocrity, as long as it looks familiar. I've built campaigns that outlasted companies like this one. If you think a 2-year gap makes me irrelevant, the problem isn't me, it's you. The room was silent, the air electric. Carla Nguyen, the HR director, nodded, subtly scribbling notes. David Wells shifted uncomfortably. Ethan stepped beside Lila, his voice low but firm. You had a chance to evaluate a candidate who could have transformed this company. Instead, you exposed its rot. That ends now. Victor stood his chair, scraping the floor. You think you can waltz in Caldwell and tear down what I built? This company was fine before you. Ethan didn't flinch. It was stagnant. And you're done. He nodded to Sarah, who handed him a folder. Your resignation, Victor. Sign it, or we'll do this the hard way. Victor's face twisted, but he took the folder, his hands shaking. Lila watched, her expression unreadable. She'd known Ethan's plan had agreed to play her part, but the venom of the interview had cut deeper than she'd expected. She turned to him, her voice low. You knew they'd do this, didn't you? Ethan met her gaze, his eyes steady. I suspected, but I needed proof, and I needed you to see it for yourself. Her lips tightened. You used me. No, he said softly. I trusted you. The room watched, sensing the undercurrent between them. Lila exhaled, then turned back to the executives. I don't need your job, she said. I don't need your validation. I came here for a chance, and what I got was clarity. This company doesn't deserve me or anyone who doesn't fit your narrow mold. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. But if you want to survive, you'll learn from this. because the world's changing and you're already behind. She walked out her heels, echoing down the hall, leaving the room in stunned silence. Ethan followed, catching her in the private corridor, lined with awards and empty promises. "Lila," he called. She stopped, but didn't turn. "You should have told me how bad it would be." "I didn't know," he said, stepping closer. "But I knew you could handle it, and you did better than I could have." She faced him, her eyes searching his. "This wasn't just about them, was it? You wanted me to prove something to myself." He nodded, his voice soft. "You're stronger than you know, and they're weaker than they think." Lila's expression softened, but the fire in her eyes remained. "I'm not going back there, Ethan. Not now, not ever." "I wouldn't ask you to," he said. "What do you want?" She didn't hesitate. "My own table, my own rules." He smiled, the first real smile of the day. "Then build it." The next morning, Sterling and Pierce's internal servers crashed under the weight of a single email. Subject: leadership overhaul and new direction. Employees opened it expecting corporate jargon. Instead, they found a manifesto. Ethan Caldwell, introduced as the new CEO, laid out a vision that left no room for ambiguity. Immediate terminations of Nathan Reed, Meredith Holt, and Victor Langston. A third-party audit of all hiring practices, and a commitment to diversity that wasn't just words, but action. Whispers spread like wildfire. What happened? Was it the Chronicle article? The day before, a scathing piece had exposed the company's old boys club culture, and now the timing felt too perfect. By noon, the HR floor was a ghost town. Doors closed, voices hushed. Ethan kept his office open, his presence a silent challenge. He wasn't here to play savior. He was here to dismantle a machine that had run on bias for too long. Around 2 p.m., Carla Nguyen knocked on his door. She declined our offer. She said, her tone respectful but firm. "Lila, we reached out this morning." Ethan leaned back unsurprised. "Good." Carla raised an eyebrow. "You don't want her here." "She deserves better than a PR gesture," he said. "Let her write her own story." Across town, Lila sat in a corner cafe, her laptop open, a draft proposal glowing on the screen. She'd made her decision the moment she left Sterling and Pierce, no more waiting for someone else's approval. She was building her own firm, Horizon Strategies, focused on brand storytelling, with a mission to amplify voices the industry ignored. She'd already secured 3 clients' contacts from her old network, who'd reached out over the years waiting for her to say yes. Now, she was ready. The barista, a young woman with a warm smile, set a coffee beside her. "On the house, Ms. Monroe," she said. Lila looked up, puzzled. "My cousin works at Sterling?" The barista explained, her voice shy. "She said you took them apart yesterday. Said it was legendary." Lila smiled, a quiet warmth spreading through her. "Tell her I was just getting started." Outside, the Austin sky burned gold, a promise of something new. But the ripples of Lila's stand were just beginning. A month later, Horizon Strategies was gaining traction, its client list growing. But not everyone was pleased. Victor Langston, now a consultant at a rival firm, had been spreading rumors, whispering to clients that Lila was out of touch and unreliable. One of her biggest prospects pulled out, citing concerns that traced back to Victor's network. Lila didn't flinch. At a national marketing conference, she spotted Victor in the crowd, his smirk unmistakable. She took the stage for her panel, her voice clear and unwavering. "Some people think they can bury you with whispers," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "But let me be clear. My work speaks louder than their lies. If you're betting against me, you've already lost." The room erupted in applause, and Victor's face darkened. Backstage, Ethan met her, his expression proud but cautious. "He's not done," he warned, handing her a dossier of Victor's recent moves. "He's trying to tank you." Lila took the file, her smile sharp. "Let him try. I'm not building a company. I'm building a movement." That night in their kitchen, the air smelled of cedar and sage from Ethan's cooking. Lila sliced oranges for tea, the knife steady in her hand. Ethan leaned against the counter watching her. You know, he said, when I asked you to do that interview, I wasn't sure what we'd find. I know, she said, dropping the slices into the pot. You were testing them, but you tested me too. He chuckled, the sound low and warm. Did I? She turned her eyes, meeting his. You wanted me to remember who I am, and I did. She paused, her voice softening. But don't ever put me in that position again. He nodded, his hand resting on her shoulder. Never. The doorbell rang, breaking the moment. Lila opened it to find Carla Nguyen holding a plain envelope. This isn't an offer, Carla said quickly. It's an acknowledgement signed by the board. We failed you, and we're owning it. Lila didn't take the envelope. Words don't fix systems, she said. But it's a start. Carla nodded. For what it's worth, you scared them. Not just Victor, the whole industry. They're watching you now. Lila's lips curved, not quite a smile. Good. Let them watch. She closed the door and returned to the kitchen, where Ethan was scrolling through his phone. News, she asked. Sandwell Group reached out, he said. They heard about Horizon. Want to talk? Tell them I don't talk. Lila said, pouring tea into 2 mugs. I deliver. They sat together, the silence full. Not heavy, but alive with possibility. This wasn't about revenge or redemption. It was about truth, about carving a path where none existed, about refusing to shrink. Lila hadn't just walked away. She'd built a door and stepped through it. If this story moves, you share it. Somewhere someone's being overlooked, their worth dismissed, their voice silenced. They deserve to be seen. And they deserve to know that when the world tries to box them in, they can build their own way out.